Welcome back, everyone, to the DreamHack Hearthstone Grand Prix. There we go. Lorinda's distracting me. We are moving on now to round number 7. And we've had a lot of crazy matches so far. A lot of the Swiss is actually just developing really quickly, and we're really getting towards the players who are getting extremely close to making it. Two of the players we've got, they're going to be coming up next, that Sol and Lorinda going to be casting for you guys. It's going to be Diggen versus A8, and I believe that is what we should call him, because that's actually what he goes by most of the time in terms of just like if you wanted to shout him down the street. But it is actually A83650.
I think if anyone was just shouting that on the street, you'd just walk past them very, very quickly because you'd assume they were a crazy homeless person.
They usually what about someone shouting Lorinda on the street? Lorinda! And then this guy turns around.
Why not?
Be pretty random. But
Lorinda is the ultimate catfish. That's where we are right now.
Raven's a bird.
It's true. No one gets that.
That is true.
That's the point.
Yeah. But these players, Diggen and A8, are actually 6-0 at the moment, so they're in an extremely strong standing to actually, you know, this one win, whoever goes 7-0, I mean, there is still 3 more rounds, but it's all looking pretty good so far for those players.
Yeah, when you get to 7-0, you get to the point where you can go 1 and 2. You're finally below the level where you have to go 50-50 anymore. Yep. Now you can not freewheel because you're up against other 7-0s. It's still difficult. You play the best players at the DreamHack, but yeah, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, you're still looking pretty okay. And in terms of, you know, these players specifically, we've seen, we've seen Diggen at the Hearthstone Championship Tour quite a while ago now, to be honest.
All the way back, right at the very genesis. I think it was Winter 2016. Yeah. So he was one of the original qualifiers for that event. Captured a lot of people's hearts with his Han Solo cosplay coming in there. The old black waistcoat, you know, entering the hearts and minds of the Hearthstone audience. But honestly, in terms of big, high visibility performances for him since then, just hasn't really been the case. He hasn't popped up again, and I feel like I've been going back to this well over and over again during this tournament, but it's a matter of consistency in Hearthstone. One big performance, one big showing doesn't get it done. It might get you into the zeitgeist for a month or two. People will remember who you are. If you go 3 months, 6 months, 12 months without putting in a big performance, you're going to fade away into obscurity sooner rather than later.
100%. And on the other side of that, A8 is actually very consistent in terms of like online cup performance, HCT points, but not really had that breakout performance. And he's just, you know, a player on the long line of players that we all know about. We know exactly who he is. You know, we know the kinds of tournament and performance he puts in. But in terms of the actual just bigger Hearthstone world, so to speak, no one's really seen him on the big stage yet make a big impact in Hearthstone. And do you think, you know, this is the chance for him, Lorinda? Because I know you love players like this.
Yeah, he's 6-0. He's not played a huge amount of DreamHack. He's been before. He's done middling results. He's ahead. But yeah, this is like a massive tournament where there's this many players in a room and you're 6-0. You're in the top 1 or 2% of the room already. Yeah, this is a massive chance for him.
It's looking really good, and really excited to see Diggen as well, just because I know we talk about both players, but Diggen, because he's had like maybe a slump, maybe not, he's just not put out any results. I'm not even sure exactly off the top of my head how many tournaments he's been to, you know, how many big lands. It's not someone we see often.
Like, he's put a bit of time in the HCG, where he's been doing a bit of work there, and I mean, it's been made clear to us that he plays a lot of Hearthstone, even amongst what pros consider a lot of Hearthstone. Yeah. He just plays Hearthstone. He's a grinder. He's one of those, yeah, he is a grinder. He plays a lot of Hearthstone. It's made clear that he's one of the better players on that team to me.
Yeah, and you know, I'm sure we'll be able to check out the lineup soon and what bands the players have got in. But going to be interesting. What strategies have really stuck out to you guys? Actually, in terms of last hero standing in DreamHack, what's really stuck out? Because there's been I think a lot more variation than I at least suspected.
I actually expected there to be a good chunk of variation. I think Druid was the easy call for everyone to make, right? I think everyone coming into this tournament will have polarized their lineup around Druid one way or the other. They would have said, okay, I'm bringing Druid. I'm going to try and set that up as a sweep deck by banning out the right thing from my opponent. Or someone saying, I'm going to bring a bunch of decks that I can queue up against Druid and not run into an unfortunate situation. And now we see the lineups on screen. You can see Druid being left up from both sides, or Druid, sorry. We have seen a non-zero amount of aggro Druid, even though that was slightly surprising to me. But Druid's on both sides. A8 does have that rogue, though, which says to me that is a leaving Druid up kind of lineup. If you have Rogue in there, that is one of the most effective counters left in the game for Jade Druid, because even though Quest Rogue is gone, Miracle Rogue does the job just fine.
Yeah, and what sticks out to me there is A8 has his Mage banned out, and I do feel Mage is one of the standout performers so far. I do want to find out what the win rate of that class is in this tournament, but looks like the players are ready as well. So without further ado, we're going to crack on with round 7, and Lorinda and Sol are going to cast the match for you.
So yeah, here we are, A83650, I believe, to give him his full anointed title going up against Diggen. All been set up nicely. You saw the picks and bans going down, and with 2 Druids left up, these Druids could be the defining force, as I mentioned, in this series.
Have we ever actually asked him where he got that name from? Just going to go there for a minute.
I'm not sure we have. I don't want to shatter the illusion that he's just gone on holiday to the UK one day, was just driving down a particularly nice country road and was like, you know what? This is the best road I've ever driven on. What's this called? Oh, it's the A83650.
You're going to have to find that road at some point, because I'm pretty sure it will exist. And just
I did actually look it up. It does exist.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We need to find that road. Okay, let's see how this goes down. And you were talking about that aggro Druid a minute ago.
There it is.
And there it is. I was talking to Crane about this between rounds. It's like we were all surprised about how much aggro Druid there is. And one of the theories we came up with between us, or we're not sold on it, is this is a closed deck format. People expecting Jade Druid, you bring aggro Druid, the ban goes wrong, you just win the match.
I think also, like carrying that through one step further, that thought process, you're expecting so much Jade Druid. The aggro Druid is actually a deck that can swarm Jade Druid early and actually push through. So if you're looking for Jade Druid counters, instead of taking a mirror match just by running with your own Jade Druid, you can run aggro Druid instead. Because quite often when someone expects a most dominant deck in the format, let's say it's Jade Druid in the example that we're using, some players will say, all right, I'll take the mirror match, but I'll tech for the mirror. Yes. But 2 points for that. One, Jade Druid is a very hard deck to tech for. There's no like direct like snipe cards that you can put in there like a Harrison Jones or whatever.
We saw that yesterday with players just not being able to beat it even by trying to tech for it.
And then secondly, it's kind of a flawed argument to say, okay, I'm going to take the best lineup and just play mirror matches and tech for the mirrors, because all smart players who bring that best deck strategy are going to be teching for the mirror, right? Yeah. All of them are going to think that same way, so you don't actually gain percentage by thinking like that because everyone else does as well.
Yeah, Lothar and I were talking about that yesterday with Eater of Secrets, in fact. It's like, you can't not play Eater of Secrets because the other guy
because everyone else does. It's just an arms race, right?
You're just losing stuff. Game in progress, by the way, of Hearthstone. Looks like a pretty good Flappy Bird start.
There's a swipe, though. A swipe and a Feral Rage, depending on how he wants to answer. Depending on whether that swipe can help him interact more favorably with Living Mana. We see some of these decks now running Pyromancer. Blood Mage Thalnos is a very, very fringe inclusion these days, but you see it around sometimes. So it looks like the swipe is being preserved here. He's just going to go for Feral Rage instead to snipe this down, try and set up a better swipe for later on.
Interesting to see Ancient of War. Whenever that's played against me as any sort of deck, I'm like, oh, why don't people play this anymore? It's a card that should... It's in the top 35, right? It's
Primordial Drake is kind of the reason why people don't play it. Like, you don't want 4 huge taunts in your deck a lot of the time. Makes it a little bit slow, but I'm with you. It's a huge, huge annoyance, and just coming down that one turn earlier can be a big deal, because the way your ramp lines up quite often, you ramp into turn 7, and that's where you stop ramping, because that's the point where ramp becomes ineffective. So having that Ancient of War just to slam straight away instead of having to wait 1 turn for that Primordial Drake can definitely be a big win for you.
And although the Drake is a massively good card, we're all sold on it, it's fantastic, I do think that decks are starting to adapt to it by playing fewer 2 health. Now, you still do a lot of damage, but we're starting to get to a point now where Primordial Drake, people are playing a lot of 3 health minions, so it doesn't instantly clear a board, although it obviously still does a lot of damage, and it comes down a turn later, so just play a great big 5-10, might just solve the solutions better sometimes. Solve the solutions? That's not how solutions work.
It's not. A8, though, is going to just go with the J Behemoth. Didn't really have too many options to the contrary. Could have just taken his whole turn to swipe, but then he's missing out on development. He's giving way too much initiative over to the aggro Druid in this spot. And this is not a nourish spot. This is not a position where J Druid is looking to nourish. You're looking to play every card in your hand to get yourself ahead on the board, and then nourish to refill afterwards. If you slow down to nourish against an aggro deck, they're just going to swarm you. And this is a beautiful Savage Roar from Diggen, setting up the value trade perfectly, allowing Flappy Bird to hit face, instant Wind Fury pick, and now the stealth is looking pretty juicy to line up with this.
Yeah, I mean, there's pretty much what you want every single time, exactly in that order. Then next turn, you can just boost it up, make it big. We all know that one. And going to be just in the nick of time to beat this Ancient of War. So,
I mean, I'm fairly sure.
Other things to do.
Fairly sure with the board state he has, he's beaten that Ancient of War anyway. But yes, of course, he would love to have got it done before any of the big taunts. Diggen might be thinking Primordial Drake more than Ancient of War, although we are now very, very deep in the tournament. So that scouting network we talked about a lot on day one will have had a chance to do a lot more work, and I think these players will have much more information about each other's deck lists, lineups, and tech cards than any of the players that we saw playing on day one.
Especially as they're 6-0 and they're both well-known Hearthstone players amongst their peers.
Yeah. They'll all have a practice group here that there's members they can share stuff with.
It's not like, what did you do against that local guy who we saw into the tournament for a bit of fun? It's like, I don't know, I don't remember what he had. It's like, what has these guys specifically got that you played on 4-0? You can find their opponents more easily and everything. And yeah, they should know what's happening.
No messing around from these two. A8 snap cues the Taunt Warrior. Mulligans away the quest as you are expected to do against the aggro Druid. You do not need a win condition in this matchup. Your win condition is run them out of stuff.
Don't lose.
You throw away that quest, you pick up Fiery War Axe, you pick up Ravaging Ghoul, all the tools that you need to answer the early board states, increase your mulligan percentages, and just try to exhaust them out of the game through AoE effects, through irritating taunt minions, Ali Armor Smith, sleep with the fishes, and then again, I feel like so many matchups we tunnel on this card, but quite rightly so, because it's such a huge boon to control decks in the new metagame, Primordial Drake.
Yeah, I was also going to say, I thought you were actually going to go as far as just War Axe there when you saw it in the opening hand. I was going to say, what else apart from War Axe is really good early in this, in your opinion? Obviously, War Axe is a card we all know and love, somehow, but the other cards, like the Ghouls, are just so special as well, right?
Yeah, Ghouls are great. Slam is fine. Dirty Rat can actually be reasonable if you have knowledge of your opponent's deck list. If they're playing a 4 to 5 5-drop list, like 2 Hydras, 1 Druid of the Claw, then Dirty Rat early is a little bit scarier. If you know they're playing a lighter list, maybe with the Murloc package even though that's got very, very rare these days, then you're just more likely just be jamming a Dirty Rat on turn 2. So there's basically, there is enough cards to be mulliganing for, 6 to 8 cards that you want in your opening hand. So that says to you, throw that quest away and just hit one of those cards with increased consistency.
Yeah, and going back to your value argument about not keeping the quest, it's a deck where if you just go 1 for 1 for the first 4 turns, obviously the Druid sometimes plays 2 down, so you get a bit of a hit.
Yep.
If you go 1 for 1 for 4 turns, suddenly you're playing a 5-drop into their nothing because you've killed all their minions, they can't buff them, or they just drop 1 small minion because that's all they've got in their deck.
Yep.
As long as you've got a way to deal with that living mana / Hydra / Druid of the Claw, then you're pretty much good. But getting there is not always that easy, as you can see here. Stuff happens to stop you getting there.
A8 chose to hold on to his War Axe here, quite rightly so. No reason to be just slamming that into a 1-1. He had Ravaging Ghoul in hand already. That was an on-curve play to take care of the 1-1. And more importantly, A8 was scared of the threat of that Vicious Fledgling that he was quickly thrust out of the game by in the previous series, so he wanted to hold on to that War Axe. Diggen recognized the situation, went Innovate Mark of Yasharaj to try desperately to get it to stick, but as I mentioned, Slam is another great utility card to have in the opening hand for Taunt Warrior, who's able to deal with the board state nicely.
And this is where we just start to hit the point where everything turns around. Just 2 big taunts the next 2 turns are going to be a massive problem here. It's not quite over. Obviously, there's still the living mana pickup. There is still this bird to be dealt with. But it's just getting to the point now where the Druid's going to have to start using too much to get through.
He does have Savage Roar to at least burst through this 1 Bloodhoof Brave that is likely to come down this turn. 4 from the patches, 2 from the hero, 2 from the hero attack will break through, allow the fledgling to attack face. At least then some ridiculous things can start to happen if he gets a Wind Fury activation. But then, as you mentioned, after that, he's got to keep plowing through taunt after taunt, and he's got to almost do it from hand because he needs to keep that fledgling connecting to face over and over again, and that's almost impossible to do. Although Swipe is a good pickup to help him get there potentially.
Yeah, and you're saying about plowing through taunts after taunts. Actually having your own taunts is something we've talked about this matchup before. To defend your minions, that was the delay line that everybody ignored. It's a little bit late now, I guess, but if he can start just defending his own minions, it might still be on.
I don't know about this swipe over the Savage Roar there. He does get the Wind Fury, as you can see from the second attack being queued up. Very, very quick. The Spectator client can't even keep up right now. And stealth versus +3 attack in this spot. What kind of read does he have on the type of removal that's in hand for A8? He saw his 3/3 bird stick in the first place, so he can rule out a few things that would be targeted removal at this point anyway. So maybe just pushing for the plus attack is a more viable option to try and win the game. But I do want to rewind. Swipe being used over the Savage Roar. If he'd got that Wind Fury, he would have been pushing 4 extra damage, first and foremost, if he'd have used Savage Roar this turn.
Swipe through a taunt?
Secondly, yeah, Savage Roar plus Hero Power was available for this turn, and then Swipe plus Hero Power was available for the next turn, which rations his damage a little bit better. He loses the patches in either world, so there's no upside to that either way. And more importantly, does he intend to Savage Roar with a bigger board state than he had there in the future? There's always, I was just about to say, the Living Mana draw that can really, really get him there. But in this spot, he is going to go Savage Roar and just pushing through here with the Wind Fury Flappy Bird. He's just stolen this game. That is 11 damage right there. But remember, I talked about it at length. A lot of people would have snap-picked Stealth to protect that bird. Diggen went, you know what? My read says he can't kill this thing. I take plus attack, I set up lethal. If a 3/6 taunt comes down, I just kill him, and that's my expected play. I'm in an unfavored matchup. I'm going to take the +3 attack risk, and that is the reason why that game was won. If you're at home saying, oh, no decisions, Flappy Bird carried, you know you would have taken Stealth there. Don't lie to yourself.
Exactly. 2/7 as well, the same thing. Exactly the same thing. Any of those drops, taunt would be just a nightmare.
Yeah. Ali Armorsmith would have survived, though, right? Because he would have gained the armor from the attack going through. But yeah, you still deal with it very efficiently.
Just keep your board going with living manas or whatever still in hand.
Yeah.
Interesting that the Savage Roar is useful there as well.
It was.
So
it paid out. He would have gained the 4 extra the first time around, but the fact that he ended up taking plus attack then meant that having Wind Fury plus Savage Roar on the follow-up turn, so his sequencing worked out very well for him. I still would like to go back and evaluate that Savage Roar versus Swipe play some more, but Diggen's plan definitely worked out in the results-oriented world of Hearthstone in which we exist.
Yeah, it's all right to be results-orientated if you can back it up. Like, if you say this is my opinion in advance and then you win, that's fine.
Should we just say oriented and orientated back and forth a few times just to trigger people?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not saying oriented ever on any cast unless somebody actually tells me I have to.
I'm not saying orientated. That word sounds stupid.
You're British.
I know. To those of you triggered in chat by now by Lorinda saying orientated, he is actually right in this instance. That is how you say it in British English.
Thank you. Yeah. Right, on we move now to things that matter other than Stottle's bad pronunciation, because mine's fine in every single aspect. And we now have Miracle Rogue, which I can't say, and nor can you.
It had to be Rogue or Warrior, right? 2 out of 9 for that whole diatribe to just fall flat on its face.
I hate my life right now. Anyway, this feels like it should be okay for the Rogue, but I assume it just doesn't get to grips with it in time, otherwise you would have picked it.
I have 2 words for you, Neil. Living Mana.
Sure.
You just can't deal with it. It's double fan or it's Blood Mage fan. Those are the 2 ways that you deal with that board state. Otherwise, you are trying to have swashbucklered into a Starfall.
Yeah, I mean, that can happen. It's relevant. It's not relevant,
it's a tiny, tiny percentage of interaction. So games where Living Mana games are the games that the Druid wins, as well as games where they just have the blowout aggro Druid start that you totally can. Bittertide Hydra games are games that can very often swing back the way of the Rogue, because a turn 5 Bittertide Hydra can get Vilespine Slayered, and that's a very big swing back in the way of the Rogue.
Yeah, there are plenty of things as well that Rogue used to be able to do that it now can't, just because of the way they build. You know, Sap is a good card, but Vilespine's better.
Not played, yeah.
Vilespine's just better. You used to just have more access to Blood Mage fan somehow. It used to be just more keepable because more decks died to the fan.
Also, you played Azure Drake as well, so you had, first and foremost, you had extra card draw in your deck. Like, you played Drake, you cycled harder, and secondly, it opened up then Drake Prep fan as a swing turn as well, because you got the spell damage from another source.
And the deck no longer seems to completely revolve around the Auctioneer like it pretty much used to. Well,
I think it's gone back slightly towards being a combo deck than the small-time Buccaneer to Tomb Pillager curve version that we used to have. That was the most tempo-focused version of Miracle Rogue that we've ever had. This one has kind of gone back a little bit in the direction towards the full combo Leroy Shadowstep days, but it's still nowhere near that. It still has essences of a tempo deck.
But as you see here, this tempo deck is just getting, it's not even, I don't know what you call it from the Druid. Tempo doesn't sum it up enough. It's like super tempo or something. The amount of stuff that a Druid just churns out in the first 1 or 2 turns.
They have a tendency to simply vomit their hand in all directions.
That'll do.
Yeah.
For me, at least.
Vomit Druid.
Puke emoji.
It's a better name than Token Druid, that some people call it, and there's literally 1 token in the entire deck.
Well, the other 275 of them are all Jades. So
there's two, to be fair.
Druid.
There's 2. Flame Elemental and Mana Treant, right? They're both tokens. I take it
there
back.
really are very few tokens. I think it started off a lot quicker, right? People started adding Taunts, they started adding Bitter Ties, they started adding the occasional Druid of the Claw.
Yeah, I think like Ravasaur Runt was hanging around in the early builds, for example, because you could like Bloodsail, Corsair plus patches, and then Ravasaur Runt on turn 3. But Ravasaur Runt was one of the first cards to go down. Rip TJ, and we've just ended up with a slightly more stable version of the deck.
And interestingly, it still gets away with it because it was so much the fastest deck of the aggro decks that it always won the aggro wars. So it's been able to afford to do this little bit of slowing down and still win against other aggro decks.
Yeah, until Evolve Shaman really came to fruition, because suddenly Devolve, as much as for a long, long time I hated that card and thought it was a really bad tech decision in the decks that I saw it in, suddenly when there's Murloc buffs everywhere and there's Mark of the Lotus, Power of the Wild everywhere, then Devolve starts looking like a very promising card. Worth talking about A8's build of this deck as well. He seems to be going for the faster Mr. Yagu kind of version, where it's Firefly's Cold Blood instead of the Arcane Giants. I'd be surprised to see Giants in this deck. Surprised to see Arcane Giants in this version of the deck. This is a little bit of a more stable version against the aggro decks because you have that Firefly, and it's just a nice curve view, right? You play a Firefly on turn 1, you dagger up on turn 2. Almost every aggro deck in the game plays a 1/2 on turn 1 now, so then you just tempo out and deal with it that way.
This is a card we didn't see much in the early days, but it seems to be played more and more now, the Direwolf. I assume it's largely for the mirror matches, where everything's just a 1/2.
It's because the deck's kind of moved away from the Finja package these days, so you basically have 5 slots left to fill, and normally that becomes an extra early game card or 2, which is the Direwolf Alpha, and then it's extra 5 drops as well, so like the Bittertide Hydra or Druid of the Claw, whatever version you want to play.
There was a period about a month ago where I was casting quite often saying, look, these decks have got too heavy now. Because they took out the Finja package, put in maybe 3 5 drops and a couple of 4-drop taunts, and
or like the Shell Shifter and Menagerie Warden version.
And you might put a Druid of the Claw. I've said that card 3 times, even though it's not a card that's likely in here, but Druid of the Claw ended up in there, and then you got Bitter Ties. And people going turn 1 Flame Elemental, sorry, Firefly, and turn 2 Pass almost. It's like, why? And so I think they've backed off that and started putting the dog in now.
This is a really, really awkward turn for A8. The thought process here is incredibly complicated, as most rogue turns are. He wants to Vilespine Slayer the board right now to get ahead of it, but that would involve using his Shadow Step and his Vilespine Slayer, which would then devalue the Edwin and the Leroy that he has in hand. Furthermore, he's thinking about a Bittertide Hydra coming down the following turn and wanting to have his Vilespine Slayer. Now he's going for the Edwin Van Cleef line, which was the second line of play I was going to evaluate, but he ends up with a 6/6 this way, which is great. He dominates the board, but now he's used his only combo tool in his hand for the Vilespine Slayer, which was the Shadow Step. So now he's not able to deal with the Bittertide Hydra that it comes down. Since Diggen did actually draw Living Mana, and I said at the very start, Living Mana games are the ones you win, the Bittertide Hydra is not going to come down here. But if it was the Hydra that was going to come down in that position, that backstab draw would have been enormous if it was a Hydra game. But unfortunately for A8, he is going to have to fight through this Living Mana for now.
Yeah, something I was going to mention before you talked about Living Mana for half an hour was the number of potential, don't look at me like that, the number of potential, you're not on camera, number of potential top decks he actually had there. He's clearly looked through, counted through the chance of that actually happening. There were backstabs, there were other 1-drops he could have used. He's got the Cold Bloods, and realised, hang on, not only is this probably the best play, but the other play can still work next turn anyway.
You say don't look at me like that because you're not on camera, as if that's a bit. It's not a bit, I just hate you.
Okay, well, that's fine. Oh, sorry, do you want me to cast?
Go ahead.
Okay, sure.
Feel free.
Some cards that sort of... No, you cast, you're good.
So Vilespine Slayer does hit the board. The backstab was picked up. One of the downsides of the Firefly build that I do want to mention is Firefly becomes an early game aggro card that you can put on the board against aggro. And then the reasoning is then that Flame Elemental token that you get is a great combo activator. It's great with Edwin Van Cleef. It's great with Vilespine Slayer. It's great with Questing Adventurer if that's in your deck. The problem is, when you're playing a very, very aggressive board flooding deck like you are here against Aggro Druid, you almost always have to put that Flame Elemental on the board to contest.
Right.
And we saw that situation come up, right, where he had to commit the Flame Elemental that he got off the Firefly, and then he was stuck with a handful of no-combo activators and a Vile Spine Slayer that he really wanted to put out. He did draw the backstab to get himself out of it, and as you mentioned, probably what, still double coin, double preparation, double backstab left in the deck, right. Another Cold Blood, another Firefly. There's a big chunk of cards that he could have comboed
with. That's where I was going with that.
Right.
He actually felt that was an extra percentage on his game.
Yep.
And he's actually managed to almost scrape through this while we've been talking through that as well. But there's just too much stuff coming at him now.
There is. This would be a fantastic turnaround from A8 here if he pulls it off. As I mentioned, it is very, very rare. Hang on, think about this. Leroy Fan is a viable line, A8. I'll cut myself off. Just have a second, thank you. I'm not saying it's the play, but it was worth considering.
Notice it, right.
Yeah.
It's the thing that's happening.
So, yeah, as I mentioned, Living Mana games are not games that you win too often, as Lotus Assassin is just drawn off the top for A8.
That's the Lotus Assassin.
It is. Cold Blood is in this version of the deck from A8, which makes you want to play some stealth minions, right? So it makes a little bit of sense.
You realise how happy I am to see that card? It was one of the cards I thought was actually going to be really good. The ability to kill a minion and then not have your guy re-killed in some tempo battles has to be strong.
Yes.
I imagine it's really good in the mirror, where your opponent's playing a load of piddly minions and so are you, and then you just kill one of them and
you just
kill
smack them
another
one by one, sure.
And then hit them in the face for 5 when you've done.
Yeah, I think if Tempo Rogue had proven to be more viable over the long term, we would see a lot more of that card. Maybe, you know, it's a card that's a sleeper hit in the next expansion. We've seen that happen multiple times, just new archetypes become available, and then a card that isn't played just suddenly takes the metagame by storm. Look no further than Gadgetson Ferryman, if you want an example of that.
Sure, right. Purify may be a card that people have mentioned to play occasionally as well, suddenly. This is probably a really good card against Shaman if it doesn't get devolved as well. Just munches something every single turn.
Oh, dude, and if you're Rogue and that eats their devolve, you take that to the bank. Right. You have Edwin Van Cleef and possibly Questing Adventurer sitting in your deck.
These cards are really messing with the deck today, guys.
Not defecating in your deck. Definitely not that. That's an entirely new and weird example.
But yeah, and so yeah, but anytime you say that about a card, it means that it's got to be at least plausible card you can put in your deck, because if they're even going to consider devolving it, it must be worth a go. And maybe we'll see more of this playing against Shaman later. We see more of A8.
So checkmate situation here from Diggen's setup, pushing down to 1 damage. Rogue has damage permanence, no way out of this. So he went Swashbuckler, which was definitely the play here to try and pick up a Feral Rage, for example, something to help him stabilize. Picking up the Tortollan Forager, he then played that to look for a Taunt minion that he could have pulled off of that with 5 or more attack, but then realizes that all of his outs are gone, commits the honorable Subaru with the SI7 to his own face.
Yeah, and goes down 3-0 to Diggen, who's now 7-0. And pretty popular guy here in the production team as well, being from Norway.
I no longer like him because he's not wearing the Han Solo vest anymore. That's as far as I'm going with it.
I think if you wore a Han Solo vest in this place today, you'd probably end up like Han Solo.
Valid point. Wait, trapped in Carbonite?
Sure. Which one of us is from the 70s?
I'm not sure your references are checking out right now, Neil.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. But what does check out is that phenomenal performance from Diggen. Aggro Druid, it was a sweep, and I'm sure a lot of people want to look at that series and go, oh, Aggro Druid swept one of those series. But there were some really clutch decisions from Diggen, primarily that Taunt Warrior game that we talked about extensively, choosing to use the swipe instead of the Savage Roar, which I really do want to like talk to him about and really like get into a discussion about figure out what's going on.
Wasn't right,
but the clearly genius pick there was the plus attack over the stealth in that spot. That was a great hand read. It was also a great bit of premonition as to what he had to beat the next turn, which then allowed Savage Roar to finish the game. And then even in that Rogue game that followed, there was a couple of minor things. You know, playing Living Mana instead of Bittertide Hydra there, it's not phenomenal, right? That's an expected piece of play from any good Hearthstone player, but it still shows an understanding of the matchup and some knowledge of the situation that you're in.
Yeah, I mean, that is just difficult. He'd already seen a fan at that point as well?
No, I don't think so.
So he could actually still lose that game with that play. It's still a decision he had to make.
There was 2 cards in hand, though, so they'd have to literally be Blood Mage fan or, you know, fan gets cast and then draws the second fan or something like that, right?
It's a whole lot of not much going on. You see there the next match is coming up. You can see it on the screen there. It's going to be Espimito versus Talk. Espimito lost to Orange at DreamHack Summer.
He did.
After a fantastic run there. And Talk, just been around forever, another of those guys.
He is a huge influencer in the French community. Right. I did actually not realize how big of a deal this is. I think, like, I've made a mistake that I kind of corrected a couple of months ago. As someone that, you know, kind of needs to gain knowledge about all these players from all the different communities, because it's kind of my job. Twitch TV, since they added the feature where you could filter by language, I've always had that slammed on English since that feature was introduced. So I miss out on a lot of the French streams, which are honestly all the way towards the top of the directory a lot of the time, right? I didn't realize, hey buddy, that's the, ooh, you lady killer, you. I didn't realize how much of a big deal this guy actually was until he came to hang out with us when we filmed the promotional video for Hearthstone Global Games, which he was a part of. And, you know, we said hi, we introduced himself, you know, the kind of modern